the Planned Relocation Simulation is a project that was jointly designed by myself at the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security, based in Bonn, Germany, and my colleague here, Michalina, who is a game designer at the Center for System Solutions, and she'll introduce herself as well. The project was funded by the Robert Bosch Stiftung and the Munich Re Foundation, who also assisted us with sort of their networks, and a lot of the design was also discussed in partnership, and we benefited from the help of colleagues from the Platform on Disaster Displacement. My name is David Durand-Delacre. I'm a senior researcher at UNU-EHS. We'll use this session to present what the Planned Relocation Simulation is, how it works in general, the philosophy of it, how we designed it, its main elements, and also how you can be involved in simulation workshops and perhaps even host your own in the coming months. I'm going to hand over to Michalina to start us off, and we'll be passing, we'll be both speaking throughout. Over to you.
Thank you, David. So hello, everyone. My name is Michalina Kułakowska, and I'm senior game designer at a Poland-based NGO called Center for System Solution. And today I think we would like to start with a short introduction of the medium itself. As you saw, the planned relocation simulation is the topic of today's meeting. So I would like to start with explaining what is a simulation, in this case, social simulation. So the medium we used for this project is called social simulation, and this is a type of serious game. I'm sure some of you had some experience with gaming in the past, be it checkers, Monopoly, chess. The serious game is something that is more serious, and social simulation is a type of such a serious game series experience. Social simulations have game-like mechanics, but also have some elements that you rarely find in more mechanical points-based games. So, for example, immersive roleplay and open-endedness, meaning that some of the pathways in the simulations enable you to explore decisions or different modes of cooperation rather than telling you which of those modes are the best to achieve the goal. So in the end, the players don't learn from the concretely set aim of the game, but rather from the simulated world and from each other. And each such social simulation is usually facilitated by a moderator and is structured in a way where it ends with a context-specific reflection at the end, which we will discuss a bit later on. So why did we actually decide to use such medium? Today, world as surround us is full of different challenges and risks that are quite complex to approach. Various factors make the future quite uncertain, and the solutions we should take are also quite uncertain and ambiguous, because we also have different perspectives on everything in the world, be it because of our experiences, values, worldviews, cultures that we were born in. The thing is that even though we often think that we understand the situation, we know the risks, we know what we need to prepare for what's going to happen in the future, because we often are experts in the field. There is still some level of entrapment. In spite of dire warnings, we fail to see the systemic interconnections and act on them. This means that we actually need something that would enable us to be more reflexive and maybe a little bit more conceptual. Something that will not point out the right answers, but rather make people reflect on the situation and understand it and come to their own conclusions. Something that could actually be more active, hands-on, experimental, something that would enable people to make their own solutions and experience the effects in more than just a number, but rather also emotions. Something that would be more people-oriented, because we also need to recognize soft skills and include some human factors, for example, attitude of stakeholders for certain solutions, how people would react to other stakeholders, what kind of emotional investments in certain challenges some of the people have. We need to create at the same time environment in which those attitudes can be safely spoken of and can be safely explored. So an environment that actually helps us bridge the gap between different stakeholders, between different perspectives, and between different attitudes and values, rather than give us one look at the situation with very tunnel vision. And this is exactly why we've chosen social simulations for the planned relocation project. And now let me bring you back to how we actually achieve those elements in the social simulation. It all comes down to how this process of development is actually led on. So in the development of social simulation, and the same happened here, we always start with the real world problem situation and analyze it. Making sure that whatever we input within the simulation is actually based in the research and encompasses all important elements of the situation. So I will give back the voice now to David, who will bring us directly to the process of planned relocation simulation design.
Thanks. Yeah, so we'll go step by step in the process that led us to this point, and we'll also give a moment of pause at the end of each step so that we can also clarify any questions that you may have. So how is the planned relocation simulation designed? Maybe just to start with a couple of definitions about what is the real world problem that we're dealing with here. Maybe just to start, so we have this one slightly technical definition of planned relocation, just to make sure that we know what we're talking about, which is a planned process in which groups of persons move or are assisted to move away from their homes or places of temporary residence. They're settled in a new location, they're provided with the conditions for rebuilding their lives. According to this definition, also, it's highlighted that a planned relocation is carried out under the authority of the state and takes place within national borders. So we're not talking about international scale resettlements here. And specifically, we're interested in relocations that are undertaken to protect people from risks and impacts related to disasters and environmental change, including the effects of climate change. But beyond these more technical definitions, there's also an interest here which is reflected in this other definition, which is to say that planned relocations are also, more broadly and sociologically speaking, an extraordinarily complex process that involves the reconstitution of economic life, leadership and political structure, environmental relations, and the reinterpretation of social and cultural values and priorities, which are often very much tied to place. So according to Oliver Smith, in short, relocation is the reconstitution of community somewhere else. And this is the sort of more broad definition that a lot of the people that we spoke to in our co-design process spoke about. Maybe also to say that part of our interest arises from the fact that there are already many climate-related relocations happening. This report, published a few years ago, already had found, I mean, with some other work that combined over 400 cases of planned relocations, and this work is actually being updated. And of course, there are many more case studies that have been published in the last few years. Also to say that we're at a time where planned relocation policy and planning is ongoing in certain places. So while it has a lot of parallels to sort of development forced resettlement, which some of you may be familiar with, the climate aspect does introduce new dynamics, particularly around evaluating sort of present and future habitability of places. Also the fact that where maybe in the past infrastructure related resettlement might have been a bit more predictable, at least in terms of timelines, climate change might have changed those timelines and also insights and bring in new actors who may be entirely unfamiliar with the challenges of resettlement and now require involvement. Maybe that's, you know, for example, agencies that do climate risk assessments. And some countries are developing policies. The most well-known is probably Fiji, and we mention it also because beyond the guidelines, they've also gone on to develop standard operating procedures and a funding mechanism, as well as, you know, risk assessment methodologies. And also, just to mention that plans are being made also at lower scales and by local authorities, as is the case, for example, of the Tahula Village Relocation Master Plan, which is a small community of the Quinault Nation in Washington State in the US. So just starting from this definition, I'll just hand back over to Michalina and say a couple of words. We then went into a co-design process to try and work out how to approach this real-world problem from a simulation approach.
So as you could see from David's slides, the reality is quite complex. So the second step of the process is there to support us with choosing the elements that would be the most relevant to the stakeholders and to the topic at hand. I was also mentioning at the beginning the human factor. And the co-design process is there to directly hear from stakeholders their takes on the situation, their expertise. That is very helpful in setting up the stage for the game, for the simulation. So what kind of timelines we should be looking at? What kind of actors should be included in the role play? What kind of actions, outcomes are to be expected in the game? What are the challenges that maybe are not obvious from the statistics or from the research, but rather come down directly from the experience of stakeholders and experts involved in different case studies? This is something that often is impossible to do through desk research, and this is exactly why this co-design part of the design process is so important, because we are through the co-design process look at the situation through the lens of the people directly involved, directly affected by the situation, to make sure that the future experience of the simulation is as close to the real life mechanics as possible. So let's hear from David how this process looked like in case of the planned relocation simulation.
Yeah, so we started work on this 2 years ago now, almost. It's the very beginning of 2024, and we started off with 4 co-design workshops, which involved people working or who have not maybe direct experience of relocation in the sense they were being relocated, but people working closely with communities who are affected by these questions of whether or not to relocate and how. I'll speak a little bit about what we asked them in a minute, but then we complemented this with also lots of follow-up interviews with other people to really diversify and get some inputs from very different case studies from around the world of relocation conversations and processes. What happened after that is essentially summarized here, but several rounds of design work in which we tried to condense all of these insights into simulation design, and also trying and testing it out, various prototypes. We held some workshops on a final prototype in June and July, and based on that final feedback, we now have a final version of the simulation, which we feel is ready to use. And so in the future, we'll talk about next steps at the end of the presentation. So we asked people in the co-design process about, from the beginning, possible audiences, what kinds of lessons, also trying to identify all the same things that Michalina mentioned, challenges and so on, and stakeholders, actors, actions. And maybe just a few lessons that were highlighted. We detail these in a handbook that will be published alongside the simulation, but I'll go through some of the essential ones, things that we were told would be very important to reflect in our design. To start, there's really the strong sense that planned relocation is a solution of last resort, and at the same time that it requires advanced planning to be effective if it is implemented, and that it's something that takes a long time. It's a long-term process. So a tension there between anticipating but also not rushing or presuming that relocation is the right approach. Also, the fact that some communities are sometimes able to relocate on their own, but in the vast majority of cases, it requires external support and is more likely to be possible with funding and expertise and from the outside. And so then it's important for the people who do provide this to realize that planned relocation is about more than just building houses. There's lots of other aspects to it, which I'll get into. And also that they can do harm in this process. Many relocations in the past, resettlement processes have been harmful and had negative outcomes for the people affected. So then there's also a sort of human rights framing, and that, the relocation should uphold human rights, and they need to center the perspectives of affected communities if they are to ever be successful. And so we tried to bring all of these things. We did our best, essentially, from that to bring into the simulation design itself.
Okay, so the third step of our development process is actually simulation performance. Why it's still development? Because usually each simulation will be different as the players become the actors in the simulation, and they create the narrative of what's going on in the simulation and how this planned relocation that is in the title of the tool actually goes on. So the simulation performance usually starts with the narrative, with the introduction of role and facilitated guide on how to engage in the performance. The players are introduced to the setting and asked to immerse themselves in the situation. Each social simulation is a little bit different. We will hear about it about the planned relocation simulation in more detail in a second. But what is important to know, there is learning curve to such performance, and there is learning on two levels. One, on how to play the simulation, but secondly, how to manage the system and how to move around the situation that is presented to the participants. And back to you, David.
So how does a planned relocation simulation workshop go? I'll start by saying that based on the co-design process that we had, we ended up on this sort of ideal simulation workshop, what we think is the best way to approach it. First is we concluded with the people we spoke to that our primary target audience is people who will play a planning or supporting role in a relocation process or relocation policy development, but who may be unfamiliar with the challenges and the complexities involved. So the simulation is something that we intend to be part more of like technical capacity building, scoping exercises, or expert knowledge sharing for planners, people in agencies that are going to be involved. And there are many such people, we think, and we know because policy is being developed and because the climate aspect has not necessarily been previously collected to resettlement, relocation, people who will be confronted with these questions and not quite be sure how to start. There's also definitely an educational setting in which this could be useful. Graduate seminars in urban planning could be an example. And it was not designed for direct community engagement. I've listed a few examples here, reasons why. But really it's because the way we approached it was this is about communicating common community concerns to planners and not trying to start a conversation about relocation with a community, which is a very different proposition and a very sensitive one. The setting, just to also be clear about what we're talking about here, this is like an in-person experience around a table. It's for 11 to 20 people to be really role-playing and active. Plus, you can also have people observing in an active way. Concretely, it takes about 3 hours, including the debriefing. And we think ideally it would be something that you use as a conversation starter as part of maybe a longer workshop or a series of discussions. So not to be taken fully in isolation and ideally complemented by discussions, maybe interventions from experts or community members and so on. And it does require someone to facilitate and guide the process. To make it concrete, we set it up. These are a couple of pictures from recent workshops, but people are set around at different tables, and I'll go into a bit of detail later about how all that works. This is just to illustrate what that might look like. And so people who join the simulation, the participants are presented with a story, a narrative about why they're there, who they are, what actions and what challenges they might be facing, and what actions they will take. And so this is to provide a bit of a sense of immersion from the beginning, ideally, so people take on this responsibility for themselves. We present people with 4 locations, so across the two tables, they are presented with, on one table, the community of Mantoa, which is a fishing village with, deep ties to the coast, where this is how people earn their living. But at the same time, they've been facing increasing climate-related damages from rising seas and storms, and this has incited a conversation about whether or not they can continue to live in proper conditions here or might need to move. And really nearby Mantua is also a forest, which is their traditional lands, a space also that has high local cultural environmental value, but is also more broadly sort of known as a place to be protected across the region. On the other table, there is another community, which we called Ombona, which faces its own challenges, but it's a sort of peri-urban farming community, so a different place, different kind of place. And then there's finally on the second table, alongside with Ombona, a major urban center, economic hub, which is Port Orica, represented by this map. As you see here on the left, some people from Ombona have already migrated there in search of jobs and essential services. So this is where we are. And at the same time, ongoing climate concern has meant that the parliament of this country, this abstracted hypothetical country, has established, as part of a Climate Change Act, a relocation decisions task force, which includes several government agencies listed here, which I'll present in a bit. And this task force is given a few broad principles, for example, to weigh relocation against adaptation and not just assume one way or the other, and also to make sure that everything is fair and that there is a participation. But all of the details are the stuff of the simulation. They're what the participants will have to work out. And we have a little signing ceremony at the beginning where representatives from each government agency sign and commit to this to these principles. These are the roles. So one of the things we heard on the top row are the ones that are community roles. And one of the things we heard from our participants in the co-design process was really that all of the roles need to capture different perspectives within the community. And so this is what these achieve. And similarly, we have different government agencies and ministries, that's the bottom row, that have different responsibilities and different perspectives on relocation. Each participant at the beginning is provided with an envelope, and they'll take on the role alone or in a pair. And so they're given a badge to wear, a role description card. I'll show you an example in a minute. And if they're from a community role, they also have households that they're responsible for. Government agencies get a budget, and some are given extra information. And also, each of them is given action cards, which will allow them to make a difference or change something in the world that I've just described. This is an example of the kind of the role-playing cards that they get describing. So for the Council of Elders, they're given information about their responsibilities, importantly also their goals, and on the top right, some quotes from the people they represent. And then they also have a series of action cards. So as I mentioned, then in practice, during the simulation, they'll be able to effect changes through these actions. And there is a whole range of them. Just to give you a few examples, here on the top left, the zoning authority can declare a no-build zone pointing to certain areas that shouldn't be built on because the risk is too high. And they can mark this on the map. Another department can install shelters for people in need of this. A community member can organize and train sort of some of its members to pick up a different sort of economic activity. Overall, these actions that people can do are meant to reflect all of these different facets of relocation that we heard about, and these include housing, heritage, service delivery, so access to essential services, safety from climate risk, and also jobs. And there's also, in addition, things to do with zoning, which I won't get into today, but it's also an aspect of this, and budgets and coordination. To talk about communication and coordination, I think this is maybe one of the most interesting aspects of our design, is that we've really created it so that there's an asymmetry in information. So some people are provided with information that will not be at the beginning in the hands of everybody else. So there's something to communicate. And in particular, when it comes to like which areas are at risk of climate change, we've created this so that some people, depending on who they are, might have conflicting information. So creating a dynamic where people have to negotiate and find out, which source of information they should believe. And also the reason we separated them, I think maybe this just to make it really clear, is because there are a lot of challenges around participation in relocation processes that we heard a lot about, and this was our shortcut or design solution to try and create some of these communication challenges between the participants in the setting of a 2-hour sort of role-playing simulation. I will now also just say all of what I've presented is basically encapsulated. We have a round structure, and people are just invited to engage with all of these materials, with the actions that they have, with the goals that they've been given. And we do this in a series of rounds. And the first step in each round is just for people to share information, to negotiate what needs to happen, to decide on that. And they're given 15 minutes. And at the end of that, we just take a moment and try to make sure that everything is recorded so that any action that has been taken in that round is shown and shared and the transactions are completed. And then we ask people with the change of situation whether or not they think relocation is or not a desirable step to take, either at that moment or soon. And then we present people finally with some risks and opportunities, which I'll show just in 1 second. We do this for 3, 4, 5 rounds, and then we stop whenever we reach time. We take a break and then we move into the debrief. Just to say about that last step, the 4th step in each round is we introduce different opportunities and different risks that will maybe affect the way people are thinking about the situation they're confronted with, and also to introduce some other aspects that we couldn't make a core focus of the simulation, but were still interesting. For example, sort of international dynamics around like, do you as a community member decide to spend time trying to plead your case at an international conference when you have so many important conversations that you need to have at home? You know, that's just one of the examples here, and I'll skip the others. And noting your conversations, I think we'll get your questions. I think we'll get to them in just 1 second. Just to say, we've done this so far with 5 groups of people representing very diverse profiles in June, July. And this is the basis on which we're going to talk about sort of where we are right now in terms of results. Everything we've presented so far is the intent and the design philosophy, and now we'll just get to that. Michalina, if you want to present the debriefing process, I'll also have a chance to read the questions in the chat and think about them.
I really like the comment and questions that we got because it brings us smoothly into the briefing, which is integral part of social simulation. At the beginning of the presentation, I was saying that we need something that is more reflexive, and this is exactly what the briefing is supposed to be. This is a guided reflection of the social simulations where participants can freely, with guided questions, but also open comments, share their experiences from the simulation, but also bridge it to their experiences from the real world through this shared space and sharing of different perspectives and different experiences, both through this shared experience from the simulation performance, as well as possibly different experiences from their real life. They can reflect on what the planned relocation is, and we will go into the details on the planned relocation simulation in a moment. But also, it can be great tool for the mindset change, because the reflection comes from within rather than from the facilitator that tells people what is right and what is wrong. So again, this experience and this element of being in it, being hands-on with the problem and learning maybe on their own mistakes or mistakes of the other participants, and seeing the direct effects of certain actions is very transforming for many players, many participants of such exercises. And now for what we actually did in our debriefings and what we've learned from them, I will give back to David.
Yeah, and I think Alistair and Besma, your maybe what I'll present now is a good place to start responding to your comments and questions. Yeah, this slide is basically a summary of what a partial summary of what Michalina was just saying. But maybe just to add that we are evaluating the results of the simulation with the 75 people that we held workshops with in June, July, and try to get a sense of what it is that they've learned, what they felt. Because as we say, like what we've been presenting, of course, is like the intent and the philosophy and the belief that these methodologies can be productive if used properly. But there's also an open question in the field of sort of gaming studies about in what ways and under what conditions these things are effective. So concretely, in terms of our evaluation, we tried to survey people both before and after, and then we also record the debriefing and sort of do some observations during the workshops. And I'll just present a few results from, we received about 50, between 50 and 60% of our participants responded to our surveys. And just to start with a sort of simple question, it was what 3 to 5 words would you use to summarize your experience? And this is the word cloud that comes out of that. Just like the 3 sort of main groupings are essentially the, if nothing else, at least people had an enjoyable experience, which possibly can be in itself, we think, linked to the second aspect, which is that they did find it engaging and insightful and thought-provoking and engaging and all these sorts of words, and that they will go a little bit into detail about what they might have taken from it actually and concretely. And then maybe the final one is that there is also an element of this simulation, which is its complexity, which a non-trivial minority found confusing or frustrating in their experience of it. So yes, this is reflected also by these sort of questions, and most people really, the vast majority of people do feel like the introduction. So it was a prototype, and we've simplified it a little bit and worked on our introduction, but it is, and will continue to be maybe a little overwhelming at the beginning. But by the time the simulation ends, we do get a majority of people moving towards feeling like they understood how it all works. And most people came out of it saying that they would recommend it, and that they had, again, a majority. It's important to note that some people also felt like they didn't have a better understanding from it. So it doesn't work for all players, but overall, we're quite sort of satisfied to see that people felt able also to connect what they saw with real-world processes. Once we start talking about it, I'm not quite sure how to interpret the one on the left, which is about being surprised. Maybe the question wasn't so good because some people felt like they observed what they had expected, while others were feeling like they'd encountered something totally new. But many of them also in the conversation sort of reconsidered some of the things that had happened in the simulation. So this is a little sort of a survey that we did, but also we asked, and this is going to be sort of the real focus of our evaluation, a lot of conversation, and maybe just to say some of the feedback we got. I'll just give this example. So one person was saying that it really reinforced why planned relocation is often the last resort. They highlighted that in their simulation, relocation was never considered. But for them, that kind of also challenged this idea that once you start talking about relocation, what you're doing is planning a relocation, rather than actually reflecting. Well, what they felt, what they took away from it was that actually this is a conversation about where is it best, where are the best conditions to live, where is that, does that involve relocation or not? Um, and Also, we were pleased to see that quite a lot of people responded with these sorts of things, that it does highlight a lot of like the interpersonal dynamics, the potential for miscommunication around relocation, and yeah, basically like those social elements. Yeah, so just a few more quotes. It was interesting to see how relationships and personalities impacted the decision making. There was also sometimes, for people working in pair, differences in interpretation of the same goals, which led to interesting conversations between them. But obviously, and actually, I think this slide could be longer. There are also aspects that aren't realistic, and I think this is why also just to highlight that it is a simplified version. So there's always going to be things that could have been included, and part of the debriefing is also just to move on to that, back to reality, and say, in our experience, share with others what would really happen, that might not have been captured by the simulation. What kinds, and this is where people share maybe things and perspectives that they would not otherwise have shared had it not been for the simulation. I think this is also the idea that it brings up themes around relocation that people might not bring up in a more traditional workshop environment. And finally, with all simulations, the aim is hopefully to move beyond the debriefing room and into actually affecting some change. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, Michalina. Otherwise, I can also.
No, I just think that, as you said, hopefully in ideal world, all the participants that participated in planned relocation simulation can take this experience and use it in their own planned relocation. But as we know, it's not really a tool to plan the relocation, but rather help participants identify the challenges, explore the situation, and support the dialogue. And I think that also brings us to what we are planning to do. So the follow-up with participants and our next steps.
Yeah, and if you can put the form link in the chat, that'd be great, Michalina. So our project will end at the end of March 2026. That's the sort of formal period in which we're working. And within that period, we have a limited budget for some in-person workshops that would be facilitated by myself and Michalina. So we're already in conversations, but if you have an interest in maybe having that organized, please reach out and we can also think about it. But more broadly, the idea is that this simulation will be accessible very soon in open access format with a lot of documentation. We're finishing a handbook right now, which explains how things work in a sort of logical sort of way, but also we'll have in the handbook lots of examples and references to real world case studies that inspired our work. So just almost that could be read independently of whether or not you use the simulation, and sort of an interesting document in its own right. And we will organize also train the trainer workshops, which will be more practical and focused on if you do want to host this with some of your colleagues, some of your project partners, or perhaps with students. We would just go through how to actually put together a workshop from printing to just assigning roles, like all of those questions that you would need to think about, and we would help you walk through that process. And as long as the project is running, we're also very happy to just be in a supportive role to anyone who does that and just sort of help you work through your preparations and provide all of the materials to make that as easy as possible for you. So if you prefer a QR code, you can access that this way. And maybe just to mention, this is going to be on the next slide, but there are terms of use, and the one important one is that it's free for non-commercial uses. And if you're in doubt about what that means, you should just reach out. If you have any doubt about whether or not your use could be construed as commercial. And we also ask that you let us know if you do decide to use it and share results of your work and that you acknowledge the source. So thank you all for joining us today. We'll make the recording or a version of this this session available online. And yeah, look really forward to hearing from you. Anyone who's interested in pursuing this conversation, whether that's to host a simulation or not. We are also at EHS very active in these relocation research and conversations, and very happy to connect on this topic for whatever reason